Aye.
Aye.
All right. Number one, request approval of resolution number 7-27-23/111-67, fiscal year 23 fourth quarter financial statements. Take it
Good morning,
away,
Commissioners.
Julianne.
So this is a requirement every year. The fourth quarter financial statements do require a resolution by DFA. It's the same types of reports that you see each quarter that I put on the agenda for you. Essentially, the biggest thing you want to look at is on the recap sheet, which should be one of the first ones you have there. DFA makes us split out cash and investments. The county doesn't really do that, so it's essentially a reasonable allocation of those investments, and I get information from the treasurer, and then we allocate it out to the different funds that can actually receive investments. So if you add up on the second page, the cash and the investments, it's going to equal the beginning cash amounts. And then the adjusted balance at the end, the balance before the reserves on the right side. If you look at the balance, that's our ending cash balance total after you take into account revenues, transfers, expenditures, and any adjustments. And those adjustments are if there's a due to, due from, for example, if we have a grant fund that we have submitted for reimbursement for expenses at the end of the year, but we haven't actually received the revenue from that yet, the general fund, we can't have a negative cash balance in any fund, and if we do, the general fund has to cover that. So that's why you're seeing a negative under the adjustments in the general fund, a negative $1,004,000. That is to cover the grants that we had requested reimbursement for, and we had not received the funding for it yet. So once we receive that funding, of course, that money essentially it gets reversed back and it goes back to the general fund at the beginning of the fiscal year 24. And then there were some auditor adjusting entries. We did have our previous auditor come out in, I guess it was in the end of June, and she worked with me and the treasurer, and we did some adjusting entries from the fiscal year 22 audit. So those are included also in those adjustments to get to our final cash balance at the end of fiscal year 23, which is $91,336,376.84. And then the general fund, as well as the road fund or county road fund, have reserve requirements. So the general fund, we have to hold 3 months of our expenditures in reserve, and the road fund, it's 1 month of expenditures. So that's what that is. So that money, it just has to sit there, and we can't use it unless there's an emergency, and hopefully that will not happen. So then the adjusted balance is going to be the balance less the reserves from those two funds, plus all the other fund balances. And then you'll see that there's a summary report that gives you a summary by fund of assets, liabilities, revenues, expenditures, basically by the line item. Then there is a more detailed, it's actually more by category, it's more by category. Then there's a more detailed report that's a little bit longer that gives you that same information with a few more line items actually split out. And then the final report is just, it's a report of the transfers. And I've also included this crosswalk because DFA requires us to crosswalk our fund numbers and our line items to their line items so that we can upload everything. And so just looking at these reports, it's like, well, geez, I don't know what some of these things are. It doesn't, and there's some of the funds like Fund 209 on the DFA side, the Fire Protection Fund, that's all of our fire departments, and that is the fire districts and the distributions and expenses that they receive from the state fire marshal. And so there's like 17 of those all combined into that one line item. So that's why I give you this crosswalk so you can see which of our county funds are included in the DFA funds that are on the DFA reports. So that's pretty much all I have for the financials. Did you have questions for me?
Where can we see the carryovers of unused money from the last budget to this budget?
So the carryovers, I don't usually put that on the agenda until after the final budget is approved. And the carryovers essentially are going to be any purchase orders that were in place at the end of the year that we had not received, well, we may have received the items from them, but we had not actually paid out for those items as of June 30th. So those purchase orders, the system, it automatically carries that amount over to the next year so that we're actually paying for it in July, but with the prior year's funds where it was encumbered. And then the only other, so the POs are, open POs that we haven't paid are carried over. And then the only other thing is for the fire departments, they have to get approval from the state fire marshal. Whatever their remaining cash balance is at the end of the year, they are allowed to carry that over if you send a request to the state fire marshal, and Matt does that. So for each of those fire districts, actually it's those ones that are in the Fund 209, all of those fire districts, he will send a letter to the state fire marshal requesting to carry over whatever cash balance so that they can use that in the following year to put towards buying equipment. Usually it goes into their capital outlay line. And then the same for their 0.25% fire protection tax. They do, those fire departments do carry over those balances, and it's mostly because fire engines are, upwards of $500,000. And so that's why we carry over their balances from year to year.
And the carryover balance doesn't make a difference what we receive in revenue the next year, because we carry over $500,000.
So there
even
is
less?
revenue, so for for example, the grants, I guess it's just the way that it is budgeted. Any remaining revenue on a grant that we have not received this year is carried over to be received in the next year. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that correctly. So, I guess it's mostly for the grants. If there are items out there, which there are, there's always grants at the end of the year where if it's a multi-year grant, most likely there's going to be remaining revenue. So that, I guess that sort of affects what the revenue, the budgeted revenue is going to be for the next year. And I'm working on, and I realized this a little bit too late. I think last time we had the quarterly financial statements on the agenda. I mentioned that I was going to try and do a recap like this one, but that is with all of the county funds. So you can see all of those 209 split out, all of everything that's in Fund 218 and some of the other funds where there's aggregated amounts. And I started working on that this morning, and because I realized it this morning, like, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. I will have it for you. I can get it to you all. I can email it to you actually later today. I just don't have it completed because I realized too late that I was going to get that for you. So that way you can see, like, on the final budget, I have one like that is our funds that matches the recap from DFA. And I wanted to do one like that for the actual expenses. It's a little bit different process because here we're dealing with budget, here we're dealing with actuals. But I started working on it this morning and I almost have it done. I was hoping I'd have it done before the meeting and I just didn't quite have enough time to get it done in less than like an hour. So, but I will email it to you later this afternoon so that you can see all of our funds split out and the balances will match to the recap from the fourth quarter financials.
So our balance last year on our budget that we went into, do you remember what that number was off the top of your head?
You know, I should have brought that with me and I did not. I'm sorry. I did not bring, you're saying from the end of fiscal year 22?
Yeah, what we worked out last year to come in. Okay, I'm just making sure I'm reading this right. So this year's budget is what we worked out is 69 million?
Yeah, so we could take a look at the difference between like last year's ending recaps for the fourth quarter. I have that information too. I can send that to you when I do the county recap for the quarterly financials. It's actually, it seems to be fairly similar. The biggest differences I think for this year too are the fact that we received money from the Local and Tribal Assistance Consistency Fund, LATCF. That is the funding that is a sort of an offshoot of the federal government's ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And so we received an additional $4.8 million in FY23. The second tranche of that, the second $4.8 million should actually be coming fairly soon. We received a notification just last week to go ahead and request that. And you have to go into the U.S. Treasury portal to do that. So I did that last Friday, and usually within a couple weeks they will send out that funding. That's the money that we have set aside for the courthouse, the new courthouse. So that's one of the biggest differences, I think, in revenue and expenditures, that's a lot. That's almost $5 million that we received just from that alone.
I'm just trying to get in my head how much the difference is and how we're adjusting to pay for it, because our income has went down a little.
Yeah, I believe it actually, believe it or not, even though expenses go up, we end up receiving a little more revenue, and we end up being fairly similar across all of the different columns, like the revenues, transfers, expenditures. It ends up being fairly similar. And I apologize, I did not bring last year's to compare it to, and that would be very helpful for you all to do, so.
I was thinking that number for last year was about 68 million. And I didn't bring my stuff either, but that's what I had in my head last year's was.
Yeah, I just didn't think it was that high for some reason. It was 60-something, but I was just trying to kind of picture what the difference was. Regardless, this is what it is.
For some reason, I was thinking it was like about 65 million, which would, if you add that additional, that would put it back at about 69, so.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I said, for some reason, I was remembering it to be around 65 million last year, so with that additional that we got, that would make sense that it's 69 now, would add that extra 4 million we got in.
Yes, that's on the, I'm sorry, which?
On the total adjusted balance, the 69,236,000. We were just trying to figure out what it was last year.
Oh, okay, right. I mean, I could run upstairs and pull last year's and bring it down if you want me to real quick. I don't have those figures in my head
Yeah.
because it's been a while, but
You
that
could-
would be really
you
helpful.
could
Want me
send
to run
it-
and do that real quick? To get
Yes,
last
do you
year's
want that?
fourth quarter, so you can see?
Well, if you don't mind.
It'll just
Yeah,
take me like
probably,
5 minutes to
yeah.
print out 10 copies of
Yeah.
that. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Can we recess it?
Sure. We're going to take just a short recess while she gathers that information. are back. Does anybody have any questions about the new information?
The payroll raises were about 1.2. Is that, do I have that number right?
I'm sorry.
After we gave all the raises to everybody? Was it about 1.2
Yeah,
million?
Yeah.
And
Because I'm like having trouble hearing. The total for what?
The pay increases this year.
Oh, the pay increases? So it was $3 an hour for basically all of the employees that were here as an employee as of June 30th. So if you wanted to, well, that's on the, if you look on the next agenda item for the budget, you're going to see on that one, although I didn't bring you the county's portion that actually splits out the expenditures by operating expense, capital outlay, and then the salary and benefits. It's just all aggregated together. So I'd have to print you one of these from last year to see the differences in the salary and benefits. I can go do that.
Nope.
Take me like a couple minutes.
Nope. was just trying to figure out I know we gave the raise, I think that's about 1.2 that allocates to the
And I apologize, I
raise.
didn't anticipate what you were gonna ask, so. It's like 250, 55, I think 255 is what we had around the end of the year.
Roughly 1.5.
Possibly a little less, because there are some part-timers that are gonna have, like, you know, they only work the 1,040 hours as opposed to the 2,080 hours. But that sounds about right.
Any more questions on this item?
Nope.
Any questions? Okay, I make a motion for the approval of resolution number 7-27-23/111-67, fiscal year 23, fourth quarter financial statements.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Righty. And moving on to number 2, request approval of resolution number 7-27-23/112-01, fiscal year 24, final budget.
So you're going to see the same type of LGBMS, local government budget management system, reports for the final budget as we have for the quarterly financials. However, this doesn't show actual expenses, it shows what we have budgeted for next year. So in a way, it might be easier to look at this one that I've done for the county, because it's going to give you each fund that we have, instead of trying to decipher the recap from the DFA side. And so the beginning cash, $91,336,366 is the same as the ending cash has to be for the fourth quarter of 2023. So beginning from there, we have our budgeted revenue, transfers in and out. The general fund has to subsidize multiple different funds, including property valuation, detention center, the road fund, the community services is all paid for from the general fund. The Tularosa Basin Regional Dispatch Authority, the HIDA fund, they do receive some grant money for the HIDA fund, but it's not enough to cover their entire budget. The convenience center, and then the health reserve. And then you'll see there are some other funds that actually help to subsidize the general fund so that we can subsidize the other funds. It's a balancing act. We just have to make everything balance. All of the budgeted transfers on the second page, it has to equal 0. The ins have to equal the outs. And then you'll see the total salary and benefits by the funds that actually have have employees in them. On the second page, you'll see the fire protection tax. We do budget a little bit for salary there because we do have the wildland firefighters that work some of the wildland fires. And so when they do that, we receive they submit for reimbursement from the state for like their equipment and man hours. And then when we receive that reimbursement, they submit their time cards for how many hours they actually worked on that fire. And then we can go ahead and reimburse them from, it's essentially, we're kind of the flow through. So we receive the money back from the state fire marshal, I believe, and then that money gets distributed out to them. That has to be paid through the 1/4% fund because they're fire district funds that they receive, the regular distribution they receive from the state fire marshal cannot be used to pay salaries. But the 1/4% fund, that's a fire protection tax, we can pay the salaries out of that fund. So those are all the salaries and benefits. That's budgeted, doesn't mean that's actual expense. Operating expenses, basically capital outlay. I did provide you with the final capital outlay report for each of the departments because there were a couple of items that had changed. One of them in particular was for the dispatch authority. When they had their board meeting, the board only approved for them to purchase one vehicle instead of two. So that was reduced down to $55,000 for that department. I think that was really the only major change. And so that's all the capital outlay. And then your budgeted fund expense is going to be all your salary and benefits, operating expenses, and capital outlay. And our estimated ending cash balance, we're looking at $74 million. Then our restricted cash, once again, is at 3 months of reserve for the general fund and 1 month reserve for the road fund. And then you have your unrestricted cash at the very end, ending the year with an estimated $69.2 million. And just remember, budget is an estimate. So if you look at, well, I'll have to print you, I can send you this from last year. If you take a look at last year's estimate compared with the fourth quarter actuals, you'll see the differences. We always end up budgeting more than what we actually expend because there's just no way. You have to go off of, what I usually do when I'm budgeting is I look at the prior 5 years of expenditures and I kind of take an average of that, and I also look at what they spent in the current year, and then if there's any particular trends or there's any particular grant funding that I know we're going to get, I will make adjustments to include that as well.
So, a question just kind of off the top of my head, on the insurance deal, that $500,000, if we were to have to pay that, that was off of last year's insurance deals. How do we pay that?
The insurance for,
The health insurance?
oh, the state, oh, that
So where did that,
assessment that they sent us?
Yeah.
I don't know where we're at with that. The last that I was aware of was that New Mexico Counties their attorneys, they're fighting the state because they believe that it is not a legal request for them to request that funding from us for services that have already been rendered and paid for. So I have not budgeted for it. If we do have to pay for it, I would suggest that we use the Emergency Reserve Fund, which has like $2.1 million in it. That's probably where it would have to come from, because it literally would be an emergency for us, because that's not something that, we were expecting. I did not budget for it because I'm assuming
Well-
that they will be able to fight this and that we're not going to have to pay it. And the concerning thing too is that for fiscal year '24, they still did not authorize any increases to the health insurance. It's the same rate that it has been for multiple years.
I know, but
So-
that's what I'm saying, if we, because we're gonna pay, if we get hit with that, you're gonna pull it out of this year's funding to pay back, which was for '23.
Right.
And then again, do we need to fund for an additional 500,000 for increase? Is it gonna come?
We don't know that. And what I imagine, whether they get the assessment through and we have to pay it or not, next year, everybody's gonna see their premiums skyrocket.
Right.
That's what they're gonna do next year to make up for it. So all the employees employees in the county are gonna be hurting in that respect of premiums.
And then the fear for that too is that when all the employees across the state for all the municipalities and the counties, when those premiums do skyrocket, you're gonna see a lot of people dropping their insurance because they can't afford it anymore. And if there's so many people that end up dropping the insurance, well, then it's not gonna be beneficial for the state to even offer that. So I'm not sure what's gonna happen with that. It's a bad catch-22 cycle that they've put themselves into. And as far as if we do end up having to pay for it, we're paying for prior years. And so out of current year revenue, there's really, like I said, I mean, we could take it from the general fund if we needed to, but I would rather take it from the emergency reserve fund. But that would be up to you as to where you wanted to pay for it from. We could pay for it out of either one.
So-
But
so-
I'm hoping at this point that that will not even happen.
So next year, the number of employees that have insurance, it'll be pulled out of their premiums, what they're paying,
Our
instead of,
portion in the county and the
Right.
employees' portion, yes.
so the employees are gonna get hit again.
Yes. And so will the county. So, because the county, for the health insurance, we pay 80%. The employee only pays 20%. So the county is going to have the most of that expense.
Yeah, because if I remember right, there was 170 something involved in the insurance, or I can divide that up by 500, half a million, and see what it. Okay.
I've got to go. I've got a New Mexico Association of Counties Board meeting this coming, what is today? Thursday, next week
Okay.
in Carlsbad, and I'll ask them what the update is on that. They'll probably talk about it there.
Right.
So
I
we'll
mean,
have
they're
the-
usually pretty good about giving us updates. I haven't heard anything since that last meeting, that last Zoom call that we
Yeah.
had. So I'm
Grace
just hoping that
Phillips
no
is-
news is good news at this point.
Yeah, Grace Phillips, I know, is working on that for the county. She's the attorney, so I'll ask her. See what we can find out.
On the road department, I think we approved that dump truck, and then Tom said that he would just go to an auction and look for it. So that's marked out as part of the funding. So let's say he goes to the auction and finds a truck, how do we fund that?
So, yeah, so that was marked out, and essentially what he was doing is he had some remaining budget from last year.
Mhm.
And so we encumbered that for the specific purpose of being able to purchase at the auction because it's like more than $100,000 less than what that price would have been new. It's much, much less. So that is, I believe he's up there right now, and he is purchasing some equipment or trucks, I believe, up there. So yeah, we did mark it out as far as budgeting for a new one, but instead he's using some of his carryover funds that he had remaining at the end of last year to pay for. So essentially, we're paying for it out of 2023 funding.
Okay, cool.
Anything
Okay,
else?
nothing else.
Anything else? No. All right, I make a motion for the approval of resolution number 7-27-23/112-01, fiscal year 24, final budget.
I second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Does anybody have anything else?
Should we try and schedule a September commission date now?
Yes,
Oh, yeah, if we,
I just wanted her to be aware, too. Brittany, we're rescheduling September meeting, September 7th. Right?
September 7th.
Yeah.
Is that, okay. September 7th.
okay. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you. Yes.